Welcome back. We're going to be talking today about the Flavian emperors who ruled from 69 to 96 CE. And Lana, why don't you go out and get us some lunch? Would you mind going for a few minutes? Do you want to go down to the store and buy some lunch for us? Would that be okay? I'm not sure she's going to do it, but we'll put her down. If you remember last time, we were talking about the Julio-Claudians, and the death of Nero plunged Rome into more than a year of civil unrest from 68 to 69 CE. And during this time, troop commanders in far-flung areas of the empire were vying for the control of Rome. The governor of Spain, a man named Servius Sulpicius Galba, was proclaimed emperor in Hispania and Gallia. He had connections to Augustus's family, and he was an old-fashioned Roman who hoped to bring back the glory days of the Roman Republic. But there was one problem. Galba was already 73 years of age, which was very, very old for a Roman at that time. Galba had rivals who also saw an opportunity in the dangerous power vacuum and the chaos that was going on in Rome. Aulus Vitellius was the commander of the troops in Germany, and he headed towards Rome with his troops, who were more loyal to him than to the state. The Praetorian Guard of Marcus Otho, O-T-H-O, was also interested in taking over, and it was not difficult for his supporters, charged with protecting the new Emperor Galba, to murder Galba. But now Otho faced the onrushing troops of Vitellius, who swarmed over Rome and forced Otho to kill himself. What a mess. The citizens of Rome had to choose up sides in a series of skirmishes and wars, featuring people they really didn't know all that well. Into the chaos of the year of the four emperors came the commander of the troops in the east, Vespasian. He had recently managed to suppress a major Jewish revolt in Judea. Supported by numerous other troop contingents in the east and in Egypt, he was proclaimed emperor, and he too headed for Rome. Vespasian was an excellent administrator and troop manager who had been a supporter of Galba in the year of the four emperors, but he did not like the arrogance of Vitellius, and he finally decided to take his chances and fight himself to become the emperor of Rome. Vespasian established his own dynasty, the successors to the Julio-Claudians, which consisted of himself and his military-trained son Titus, and his second son, the younger Domitian. The family ruled successively from 69 to 96 CE as the Flavian Dynasty, replacing the Julio-Claudians. Now, Vespasian himself was a military man, and he was not born into an elite family. He was a down-to-earth guy, and many felt that he was the perfect heir to Galba's idea of a return to the old Roman Republic. Vespasian, however, had a big problem. Much of the art and architecture of his predecessor Nero had been devoted to self-aggrandizement, and so in the area originally occupied by the huge lake of Nero's Domus Aurea, or Golden House Palace, Vespasian set out to build something that would entertain the masses. Well, in it he put his gigantic Flavian amphitheater, or as we know it today, the Colosseum. Much of Nero's palace area became a large public park, but the Colosseum became the centerpiece. The name Colosseum wasn't really used in Vespasian's time, but much later The building took its name from the colossal statue of the sun god Helios, which the Emperor Nero had set up at the entry to his palace complex, and which was moved later on to the area right in front of the amphitheater. The money to build the complex had come from the Roman victories over the Jews in Judea. The Colosseum consisted of a huge oval, which originally had a wooden floor inside, and down below there were areas for storing the beasts that were to be transferred into the arena from below. The term arena derives from the Latin word arena, which refers to the sand, which was put into the wooden floor, onto the wooden floor, and on which the animal fights and gladiator contests were held. Originally also, mock sea battles might be held in the Flavian amphitheater, and these were known as naumachii, in which these famous sea battles that people knew about from history might be reenacted as mini-battles right there in the arena. The interior of the Colosseum could be flooded with water, and small ships stocked with fighting sailors might engage one another. By the time of the rule of Vespasian's second son, Domitian, the naumachii were no longer held, and the interior of the Colosseum was filled up with compartments to hold and raise up animal cages into the and to store special displays that could be raised up and revealed right into the arena. These games involved all manner of special contests, especially in October, when the greatest games were held. Prisoners were executed, women fought, men fought animals or one another. A light-armed fighter known as a retiarius, R-E-T-I-A-R-I-U-S, might be armed with a trident and a net, and he might be pursued, be followed by what was called a secutor, S-E-C-U-T-O-R, a slower, more heavily armed man, so that one could have a contest between size and strength, speed and agility. The term gladiator came from the gladius, or the sword, that was used. The Colosseum had 3 rows of engaged columns on the outside, plus a top row of engaged pilasters, 4 stories in all. The lowest column row was Doric, then came Ionic, and finally Corinthian for the upper 2 rows of the building. Up top were vertically set wooden beams, which formed a brace upon which to suspend an awning that covered over spectators during the hot days of summer. The awning was suspended from huge thick ropes, which were tied to embedded tombstone-like stone anchors that were placed all around the structure. The managing of the awning was in the hands of particular sailors who mainly came from Misenum, down around Pompeii, and who were specialized in the handling of ship sails. The Colosseum was also surrounded by other structures, no longer visible today. There was a training area, a kind of mini Colosseum, part of which has been exposed behind the Colosseum. The structure of the Colosseum itself was a skeleton made largely of light-colored travertine blocks at the key load-bearing areas, with tuff blocks used for the less critical areas and concrete used to make the vaulted foundations for the seating of the spectators. An annular vault, which is a barrel vault on a curve, ran around the seats. Ramping vaults, or barrel vaults, which sloped upwards, were also used, as were groin vaults or cross-barrel vaults, so that the building, which sat some 20,000 people, could empty out quickly and efficiently after a gladiator show. When Vespasian died in 79 CE, he was succeeded by his son Titus, who, despite anticipating a glorious future, died very young in 81. and he was succeeded by his younger brother Domitian, who proved to be much more like Nero than he was like Vespasian. He was not particularly a military man either, although he promoted with great fanfare a trumped-up campaign against the rather peaceful Germanic people known as the Chatti. I'm very upset about Domitian's rule because he attacked the Chatti, and actually my wife's family, my wife's maiden name was Schatten or Schatti, and she's from Switzerland. This is the very area that Domitian attacked. So actually Domitian, if he'd have been more energetic and a better military man, could have eliminated my wife's family, and I wouldn't be married today. In order to shower glory on his predecessors and bask in it himself, Domitian completed the Colosseum and had erected near it a triumphal arch, or what in Latin we call an arcus, A-R-C-U-S, which has come down through history as the Arch of Titus, even though Domitian actually put it up. It also celebrated the sacking of Jerusalem in the Jewish Wars, which was capped by the destruction of the Jewish temple and the carrying off as booty of the silver trumpets that it called the faithful to celebrate Rosh Hashanah, the table for the displaying of the shewbread, the unleavened 12 loaves of bread that were placed at the altar of Jehovah on the Sabbath by the Hebrew priests, and other temple treasures. The Arcus was thus a huge propaganda billboard announcing the accomplishments and explaining the lineage of the ruling emperor and the dynasty. The Arch of Titus originally had 3 openings, but the monument had been built into a medieval fortification and was finally restored in the early 19th century by, of all people, Napoleon's classically disposed architect Giuseppe Valadier, so that only the central portion of the Arcus may be trusted as authentic. On the inside, those passing beneath along the sacred way to and from the Roman Forum would see 2 major panels containing relief sculptures. On one, the sacking of the temple in Jerusalem was prominently displayed as part of an imperial triumph, marching its way through a triumphal arched gateway. Some of the marchers carried placards on a stick, the so-called tabulae ansatae, or winged tabulae, winged images, which announced the victory and described the troops involved and the booty that was taken out of the temple. On the other panel appeared the emperor in a chariot holding the scepter of Jupiter and a palm branch and wearing a laurel and a neck ornament or bulla, which was used to ward off evil spirits. Unlike the Areopagus Augusti, which we've looked at before, and which kept the emperor separated from the divine figures or personifications, this panel shows Titus in the company of the personification of the Senate as an older toga-clad man. And also he's in the company of the genius of the people of Rome, who's shown as a muscular, long-haired youth. The lictors also appear, carrying the beechwood rods symbolizing the power of the emperor. The rods almost form a radiant crown over the heads of the horses that are pulling the imperial chariot. Well, the burning of the Jewish temple, the establishment of a poll tax in Jerusalem, the abolition of the Council of Jewish Leaders, the scattering, or what is known as the diaspora, of the Jews, and the institution of the formal worship of Jupiter on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem were considered major accomplishments of the Flavian regime, described by the historian Flavius Josephus. Around the outside of the arch, in carving of lesser quality, the parade of spoils out of Jerusalem is particularly celebrated. Well, this is a monument to help justify a weak emperor, and a monument that celebrates Roman imperialism at its most blatant. The Flavian style shows a fall-off from the artistic classicism of the Augustan age, whereas Augustus relied on flat, carefully rendered, highly plastic and supple carving. The Flavian sculptors often relied on deep pockets of light and shade to create an immediate sense of flashing highlights. There was less carefulness in the execution. The figures lacked classical proportion. And the sculpture tends, figures, the heads of the people, tend to be stacked up one above another, rather than to be on the same level and appearing to recede into the background as they did on the Areopagus. These figures are tiered up, they're stiffer, they're stumpier, they lack the catenaries or chains of drapery. So it's a kind of stiffer style, a more cursory style. Visitors to the arch often forget also to look up once they are inside the archway, where one would see the Emperor Titus undergoing an apotheosis and being borne up into the realm of the gods. Domitian built an enormous palace for himself, the Flavian Palace, which consisted of an enormous public space, complete with a huge reception hall. So the Arch of Titus wasn't enough for him. He had to have a big, big palace as well. And in it there was a massive, really enormous public space that he used for his reception hall. And he had a massive dining room surrounded by fountains with gurgling jets of water spewing forth. This was a big palace, a palace for the public and a palace that he could also live in, because next to this massive complex for public reception and public dining was his personal home, overlooking directly the Circus Maximus, so that he, a great sports enthusiast, could watch the chariot races without having to leave his home at all. It was during the reign of Domitian that the most famous tragedy occurred in the entire history of Rome. It was disastrous back then, but it has become even more famous to us today. I'm talking about the destruction of the town of Pompeii in 79 CE during the brief reign of the Flavian Emperor Titus. Pompeii, a working-class town of about 10,000 people maybe, was located in southern Italy near the coast. It was covered with ash and struck with intense heat from the eruption of nearby Mount Vesuvius. The more trendy, jet-settier town of Herculaneum, located right on the slopes of Vesuvius, possessed a magnificent view over the landscape, but it was particularly vulnerable to the eruption. It was hit with a pyroclastic flow of energy that could boil the blood right in one's veins, and then it was buried under many, many, many feet of lava. It has still been only partly excavated today, since a modern town perches right above the heart of it, and since digging down into it requires prolonged use of a jackhammer. The volcano exploded, carrying ash as far as 40 miles away. Thousands may have been killed in the disaster, although most of the citizens of Pompeii, if they heeded the shaking earth and they watched the sky, had time to flee. At Herculaneum, intensely heated poisonous gas at temperatures beyond 900 degrees Fahrenheit moved rapidly from Vesuvius and struck the town with enormous force. Some 300 people trying to escape were huddled and trapped beneath a cliff at the edge of the waterfront. More victims may yet be found in future excavations. Herculaneum has proved very difficult to excavate, while Pompeii, being buried under thick layers of relatively soft white ash that's easily excavated could be dug much more efficiently. John Dobbins, professor at the University of Virginia, has been excavating at Pompeii for many years now and is a world-recognized authority on the area.